What if your earliest memories didn't belong to this life? In this video, we'll explore 7 ordinary people, most of them children, who began describing places they'd never visited, people they'd never met, and deaths they had never experienced. In each case, investigators followed the trail, and in each case, what they found waiting at the end of it was far harder to explain than anyone had anticipated. Jeremy Anderson, James Hauser. Jeremy was born in Wacomas, Oklahoma, and at the age of 2 insisted that his name was not Jeremy but Jimmy. One day he was looking at a picture book with his grandmother and saw a picture of a truck and said to her that it was a truck just like that in the picture that struck him and killed him. His grandmother said that Jeremy was extremely angry with the truck driver that had killed him. On another occasion, his grandfather Jack was lying in bed and resting a sore back, and Jeremy walked into the room and said, "What's up, Grandpa? Is your back killing you?" His grandfather replied, "Well, it's not killing me, but it's very sore." Jeremy then said, "Well, one time my back was really sore and it killed me." In 1967, 2 teenagers by the name of Jimmy Hauser, 14, and Kevin Lucas, 16, were driving a Buick sedan. Kevin, the supposed driver, was driving at a speed of 75 miles an hour when their car struck a truck at a rural intersection. The car then skidded about 99 feet before striking another truck before spinning another 108 feet. Although Kevin Lucas survived the accident with serious injuries, he had no memory of the accident, and Jimmy had been killed. James Hauser, or Jimmy, was buried at Tonkawa Cemetery about 90 miles from Jeremy's house. It turns out that Jimmy was the son of Nancy Anderson and the half-brother of Ron Anderson, who was Jeremy's father. James Anderson's gravestone reads August 11th, 1952 to August 12th, 1967. In April 1980, when Jeremy was 5 years old, he was taken to where the accident had taken place 13 years previously and got extremely emotional and described how he'd fallen out of the car. He said, "I was going like a bullet. It went like a bomb." The undertaker, who had overseen the damaged body of Jimmy, had described the type of injury normally sustained by the driver of the car and not the passenger. Jeremy Anderson had always claimed that he was the driver of the car and not Kevin. Robin Klein, and Tibetan student. When Robin was just 5 years of age, his mother noticed him making strange sounds, and after a period of time, his speech became more fluent, and he continued to utter the same strange sounds. Because Robin had made the sound so often, his mother was eventually able to make out what his son was actually saying, and started to recognize them. One evening his parents were having a dinner party, and she discussed amongst the friends that her son regularly made strange sounds, as if they had meaning to him. One of the guests at the party offered to come into the nursery and listen to what her son was saying, and found that he was saying many strange-sounding names. The guest asked the mother whether she could come back with someone who was an expert in languages, and 1 week later returned with a professor. The professor sat with the young man for 1 hour and said to his mother that the language being spoken by his son appears to be a dialect that came from northern Tibet. He recognized a few others, but many he did not recognize at all. The professor asked his mother whether the family had ever visited that region or whether any of their friends had spoken the language around the child. His mother replied no to both questions, and they went back to the nursery. The professor then asked Robin where he had learned the foreign words, and he replied, "In school." His mother then said, "But Robin, you've never been to school." Robin then replied, "When I went to school before." The professor then asked Robin, "What did the school look like?" Robin thought for a moment and said, "In the mountains." But then he said to his mother, "But not the sort of mountains we went to in summer." The professor then asked, "Was the school made of stone or wood?" And Robin said, "Of stone." He was then asked what the teachers were like, and were they men or women. He said they were men, but they didn't dress like you or Daddy. They had skirts with a sash around their waist that looked like a rope. Robin then gave a detailed description of the school he went to. The professor was so fascinated by what the young boy had told him that he decided to go to northern Tibet and seek out the school Robin had attended. He later wrote to the parents and said that the area their son had described was near China and was fairly accessible in eastern Tibet. He then said, "I have found the school your son described, which is in the Kwenlun Mountains. Rocky and arid and nothing like the mountains you visit in summer. He said it fitted Robin's description in detail, including the lamas who teach there. Dorothy Eady and Benshrit, High Priestess. Dorothy Louise Eady was born in London in 1904. At the age of 3, fell down a flight of stairs and seriously injured herself, where doctors initially declared her dead. However, she made an amazing recovery and then started exhibiting strange behaviours and asked that she be brought home and started to speak in a foreign language. At Sunday school, she started comparing Christianity with the ancient Egyptian religion and was expelled from a Dalit girls' school after she refused to sing a hymn calling on God to curse Egyptians. One day her parents took her to the British Museum and whilst looking at a photograph in one of the exhibit rooms, cried out, "There is my home, but where are the trees and the gardens?" What Dorothy was observing was a temple of Seti I, the second pharaoh of the 19th dynasty of Egypt, around 1290 BC. She then ran about the halls of the Egyptian rooms, kissing the statue's feet. After the first trip, she would regularly visit the British Museum, where she met a man by the name of E.A. Wallace Budge, who encouraged her in the study of hieroglyphs. After leaving school at 16, Edie became a part-time student at Plymouth Art School and began to collect Egyptian antiquities. In 1931, she moved to Egypt, and on arriving, she kissed the ground and announced she'd come home to stay. She married a teacher of English by the name of Imam Abdel Magwid. She would later report nighttime visitations by an apparition of Hor-Ra, who told her of a previous life as a young woman in ancient Egypt called Bentrishid, who had reincarnated in the person of Dorothy Eady. Bentrishid's mother sold vegetables and her father was a soldier during the reign of Seti I between 1290 BC to 1279 BC. At the age of 3, her mother died and she was sent to the temple of Kom el Sultan and was brought up to be a priestess. One day, Seti I visited her where they became lovers, and when she became pregnant, she told the high priest who the father was. The high priest told her that she had committed a serious offence, where she committed suicide rather than face trial. In 1935, and 2 years after her marriage ended to Imam Abdul Magwin, Dorothy went to live in Nazlat al-Saman, near the Giza pyramids, and met archaeologist Salim Hassan of the Department of Antiquities. He employed her as a secretary and draftswoman and was the department's first female employee to Hassan and became valuable to other Egyptian scholars. Under her own name, she wrote articles and books and befriended many of the famous Egyptologists of the era. During this time, she prayed and made frequent offerings to the gods of ancient Egypt, and would often spend the night in the Great Pyramid. On the 3rd of March 1956, aged 52, she moved to Arabat Abydos, where she was given the name Seti and made regular visits to the Temple of Seti and had shown advanced knowledge of the temple. The chief inspector from the Antiquities Department decided to test her knowledge and asked her to stand at particular wall paintings in complete darkness, where she was instructed to identify them based on her prior knowledge as a temple priestess. She completed the task successfully, even though the painting locations had not yet been published at the time. For Dorothy, the Temple of Seti was a place of peace and security, and felt watched over by the ancient Egyptian gods. Dorothy Eady, or Seti as she was now known, claimed that in her past life as Bentrishid, the temple had a garden where she'd first met Seti I. These were the same gardens that she described as a young girl living in London that were not believed by her parents. While she was living in Abydos, the gardens she had described in her previous life as a temple priestess was discovered by excavators, and the garden matched her descriptions. Dorothy turned one of the temple rooms into a personal office and described the Temple of Seti as like entering a time machine where the past becomes the present and the modern mind has difficulty understanding a world in which magic is accepted. Dorothy wrote and detailed many modern practices from ancient times in short articles written between 1969 and 1975 and were edited and published. At the age of 60 in 1964, she began work as a part-time consultant for the Antiquities Department, guiding tourists around the Temple of Seti and explaining the symbolism of the painted wall scenes. On the 21st of April 1981, Dorothy Eady, or Seti, died in Abydos and was buried in an unmarked grave facing the west in the desert outside a Coptic cemetery. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. Nicola Wheater. When Nicola was just 5 years of age, she told her mother that she had lived a past life in the village of Haworth, near West Yorkshire in England. On her second birthday, she was given a toy dog, which she named Muff, and stated that it was the same name as the other dog she'd had before. Over time, she would talk to her toy dog and discuss incidents and experiences that they'd shared in the past. One day, Nicola asked the mother, Kathleen, "Why am I a girl this time? Because last time I was a boy." Her mother then asked Nicola what she meant by this time, and Nicola replied that when Mrs. Benson was her mother, she was a little boy and played with Muff. Kathleen Wheatley, her mother, had never heard of the surname Benson mentioned in her family and wondered where she'd got the name from. Nicola then described in detail how her previous mother, Mrs. Benson, would tie her hair up funny, and she wore a long skirt with an apron, like the one her doll wore. However, she said that she did not like her father because his face was always dirty and he wore large, heavy boots. She said that he worked on the railroads and they lived in a small house close to the tracks. Unfortunately, Nicola could not remember the name she had when she was a boy, but remembered having 2 younger sisters. She then described the house they lived in, which was grey stone, in between 4 houses that were all joined together in a row. Nicola said that at the back of the house were fields, where she would play with Muff and another young friend, and they sometimes played near the railway tracks, which his mother did not like him doing. One day when they were playing on the tracks, she had memories of seeing a man walking along the track swinging a lamp, then saying that a fast train suddenly came from behind and knocked him over, and he was taken to a hospital. In hospital, he kept being asked if he was all right, but he couldn't answer them, and unfortunately went to sleep and died. She said he went to heaven and met other people before being born again, but added that, "I didn't really die because I came to you, and now you are my other mummy." Kathleen decided to take Nicola through deserted country lanes and windy moorlands, heading towards the village of Haworth. It was a place she'd never visited before, and after a while Kathleen became lost. Nicola then said that she knew the way to go, and proceeded to direct her mother down unmarked lanes, and they eventually arrived in the village of Haworth. Nicola then directed her mother to the home she had lived in her previous life as a boy, and found her old address, which was 12 Chapel Lane, Oakworth, which was one of 4 greystone terrace houses. The house fitted exactly the description that Nicola had previously told her mother. They then visited the Haworth Parish Church to see if they could get any information on the Benson family. The rector of the parish said that the name Benson was not known in the parish, but nevertheless gave them permission to check the records for births, deaths and marriages, but told them it would probably be a waste of time. As Kathleen was checking the names on the records in the old books, she came upon the surname Benson and found an entry for the birth of a baby boy by the name of John Henry Benson, dated the 20th of June 1875. The father's name was Thomas Benson, a railway plate layer, and the mother's name was Lucy Benson. Kathleen then researched the archives at the City of Bradford Metropolitan Council offices with the help of a Mr. Ian Dewhurst. They checked the census records for the year 1881. The address of 12 Chapel Lane, Oakworth, showed Thomas Benson, 29 years of age, railway plate layer, wife Lucy, 30 years of age, daughter Heffiabar Benson, 3 years of age, and Sellers Benson, 6 months old. There was no mention of their boy John Henry Benson in the 1881 census, as you'd seen recorded in the church records, which suggests that he must have died before the census records were taken in 1881. The fact that Nicola had remembered having 2 sisters that were recorded in 1881 means that John Henry Benson must have died between 1880 and 1881, which would have made him only 6 years of age when he was fatally struck by a train. There appears to be no doubt that Nicola had recalled a past life as a boy who lived and died at the end of the 19th century. What other explanation could there possibly be? and how was she able to recall her previous signing of Stevenson and the location of the house? Jonathan Pike. When Jonathan was 3 years old, his family moved from Holbridge, Essex, England, to Priory Park near Prittlewell, close to Southend-on-Sea in the southeast of England. One day, his mother Anne and Jonathan were walking through a park and noticed some men gathering leaves and twigs and placing them onto a large pile before burning them in a large blazing brazier fire pit. It was at this point that Jonathan casually told his mother that when he was 10 years old, he used to come to the park and set fire to the piles of leaves, where a policeman would then chase them away. His mother ignored his comments, believing they were just his childhood imagination. Late one evening, Jonathan was watching his mother ironing, and his father Tom told him it was time for bed. As they were walking upstairs to prepare for bed, Jonathan said to his father that when I was a little boy, my other mummy also ironed clothes. His father then said, "You mean you have watched mummy do the ironing?" But Jonathan replied, "No, not this mummy, but my other mummy." His father asked, "What other mummy?" And he replied, "The other mummy I had when I was here before." His father then asked, "What do you mean that you were here before?" Jonathan then said that he used to live here before, when he was a little boy, the last time, with my other father and mummy. On another occasion, his mother took him on a bus ride, and they drove past some very large white houses in nearby Chalkwell, and Jonathan suddenly pointed to the houses and said that was where my Angela lived. His mother then asked him who Angela was, and he replied, "She's my wife." His mother then said, "How could you have a wife? You're only 3 years old." "Yes, but when I was here last time, I grew up to be a big man, and Angela was my wife." Jonathan said that when he'd been living before, he also had 2 children, a son and a daughter, who was also called Angela, after his wife, but could not remember the name of his son. Later that day, as they were returning home by the same route, they came to a crossroad where Crosby Road bisects the Ridgeway, and Jonathan became upset and agitated. "That's where my little Angela got killed by a car." His mother decided to make some inquiries about the incident and spoke to a Sergeant Ernie Dark of Southend, who remembered a fatal accident involving a child at that very spot about 30 years before, and remembered that the fatal accident had involved a girl. On another occasion, when Jonathan was riding on a bus with his mother, they approached a location between the Bell Public House and Cuckoo Corner, where Jonathan pointed to a large garage called Earl's Hall Motors and said, "That's where I used to work as a mechanic." Is this another fascinating case where a young English boy was able to recall a past life in detail? In 1968, renowned Canadian psychiatrist Ian Stevenson received a letter from a woman called Charlotte Eastland, who had just read about his research into reincarnation. In the letter, Charlotte believed that her daughter Susan had vivid memories of the life of her deceased older sister Winnie, who had been fatally struck by a car in 1961. She claimed that when her daughter was about 2 years of age, she made references about the life of Winnie and an uncanny amount of knowledge about her. Susan also remembered playing in the fields with horses with her sister Sharon. She said that she was not afraid of the horses and had even walked under one. It so happens that Winnie had played with Sharon in a pasture and really was unafraid of horses and had even walked under a horse. Susan had a birthmark on her left hip, and when Professor Stevenson obtained a copy of Winnie's medical records from the hospital where Winnie had died, the birthmark was in the exact same location where Winnie had been fatally struck by the car. It was clearly shown in the hospital's autopsy report. The following is the amazing story where a young girl by the name of Winnie Eastland dies at the age of 6 after being hit by a car and is reborn into the same family as Susan Eastland. In 1961, when Winnie Eastland was struck and killed, the whole family, as expected, felt excruciating emotional pain. Half a year later, Winnie's older sister Sharon dreamed of a dead sister, saying that she would be returning home. 2 years later, Winnie's mother Charlotte became pregnant and also dreamed of a dead child, saying she would return home. In 1964, as she was about to give birth, Mr. Eastland heard a voice say distinctly, "Daddy, I'm coming home." Charlotte Eastland gave birth to a baby girl, who she named Susan. Charlotte believed that because her deceased daughter Winnie was constantly on her mind and had dreamed about her returning, she felt that she'd given birth to her dream. When Susan was 2 years old and learning to speak, a strange thing happened, where if anyone asked her age, she would say that she was 6 years old, which was Winnie's age at the time she had had the terrible accident. One day when Susan saw a picture of Winnie, she suddenly became emotional and said, "That is me." Susan also talked about playing on the swings at school, even though she was still very young and had never been to school and had never played on swings. Before her death, Winnie had attended school and was always playing on the swings. Because of the strange behaviour of their daughter, Charlotte and her husband could not help but think, is Susan really their deceased daughter Winnie, who had reincarnated and returned to the family? When Winnie was alive, Mrs. Eastland used to pull out a cookie jar that had a picture of a cat on the lid, where she would regularly play a game with them. When one of the children wanted a cookie, she pretended to ask the cat how many pieces he could get. Then she replied in a cat's voice, "Meow, you can take 1," or "Meow, you can take 2." After Winnie's death, Mrs. Eastland put the jar away in a cupboard and kept it out of sight. When Susan was about 4 years old, Mrs. Eastland decided to take the jar out of the cupboard and fill it with cookies, as she used to do with her daughters. The first time Susan asked for cookies, Mrs. Eastland had momentarily forgotten that Susan was completely unaware of the cat game and said to Susan, "Okay, what did the cat say?" Susan's answer surprised her, where she said in a soft voice like a mother's, "Meow, you can take 1 piece." That was not the only surprise, for her mother found later that there were more surprises to come. When Susan spoke clearly about things that she had personally never experienced in her current life. One example was where she said that she once went with a family to the sea to catch crabs, and also said the names of the people who had been present at that time. What Susan described was exactly what had happened the year before Winnie had died, when the whole family went for a walk along the beach in Washington. Although Susan was only 5 years old, she still claimed to be 11 years older than her brother Richard. Winnie was 3 years older than Richard. As a result, the family increasingly began to believe that Susan was Winnie. Mrs. Eastland once asked Susan if she remembered little Gregory and Uncle George, who lived across the street. The mother was fully aware that Susan had never met them, because Susan was born in Idaho, and when Winnie was alive, Gregory and Uncle George lived in a different town. Unexpectedly, Susan said, "I miss Greggy. I often play with him." Greggy is the nickname for the boy Gregory. Susan also said that she missed Uncle George. When we went to school, we would often stop and play at his house for a while. That was true, as Winnie would often go and play at her uncle's house. And the sad fact was that Winnie was actually playing at her Uncle George's house on the day of the terrible accident. Susan later recounted another interesting story, saying that one time when she went shopping with her mother had left her next to a food stall that was not too far away. Then suddenly, a boy ran up and kissed her, making her father very angry. Charlotte Eastland remembered the incident as if it was yesterday, but she understood clearly that it wasn't Susan who had lived that event at the food stall. It was Winnie. The parents found that Susan and Winnie had very similar personalities, that they were both sociable and good-natured. It was also interesting to note that Susan had a birthmark on her left hip that was in the exact same location where Winnie had been fatally hit by the car. It was clearly shown in the hospital's autopsy report. So, how come Susan was able to recall so much of her deceased sister's life, unless she'd lived it before? There appears no doubt that Winnie Eastland, after being deceased for 3 years, had been reincarnated into the same family, and was now Susan Eastland. The following story is an account of a young boy called Matt, who from a very young age had an amazing amount of knowledge about his previous life. Matt's mother, Melissa, was intrigued about a story that her 3-year-old son had been talking about, where he appeared to know all the technical details of firefighting in New York City. However, they lived in California. Melissa said that from a very early age, her son Matt had been obsessed with firefighting, where he would get up every morning and put on his firefighter outfit. His mother had bought him a small firefighter outfit as a reward for potty training. After putting on the outfit, he would tell his mother that he was going to work. He would then pick up his play axe and proceed to chop at the walls. His mother asked him why he was chopping at the walls, and his response was because there is a fire behind them. Because of his infatuation with being a firefighter, he was asked whether he wanted to be a firefighter when he grew up, and he said, "No, I am already a firefighter." Matt even had his bedroom set up like a fire station with everything according to where he says it should go. He even had 4 fire hats in his parents' bedroom, and his explanation was that they could get to them more quickly if there was a fire. Matt said he wanted to progress to having a real air tank and real axe for his fire station because, in the case of a real fire, the toy ones would not work. The young boy appeared to be extremely protective of his family. Every night before going to bed, he would put on his fire boots and helmet, walk into his sister's room, and shine his flashlight around the room, and then announce, "All clear." As soon as his procedure was carried out, they could relax and sleep. Matt was also concerned in the event of not being able to get out of the room, because if he was unable to open the door, how could he rescue everyone? So his father made an escape plan for him along with a special drill, so that he would know exactly where to go in an emergency. This seemed to settle Matt. Their son made many comments that would make his parents laugh, such as driving through red lights with the sirens on when they were not actually attending an emergency. He also told his parents that they would really enjoy the Christmas parties at the fire station because everyone had a lot of fun. He said that on one occasion they had made some popcorn, and when the popcorn burned, they took it outside and sprayed it with a fire hose and laughed about it. He even tried to give his mother directions to his fire station and said, "You take a left, then a right, and his station is on the left." Up to that point, his parents realised that their son's keen interest in firefighting was just the tip of the iceberg, where he would constantly talk about it. Their son seemed to know everything about firefighting, and whenever they asked him a question, he would laugh and say, "Why are you asking me this? You know I know the answers." But when he did talk about firefighting, his voice would change, and he would become extremely serious and matter-of-fact. At the start of his son's fascination with firefighting, his mother was initially uncomfortable, but later came to the conclusion that he was really talking about a past life, because there was no way that a 3-year-old could have that much knowledge. Melissa said that her son could not have learned about firefighting from any family relative or friend, and nobody she knows was a firefighter. She said that she's a nurse, but in the last few years had been a stay-at-home mother with her children, and knows what Matt had seen or heard. One evening when Matt was 3 years old, things went to another level when shortly before bedtime, his mother was reading him a book called Curious George in the Big City. The book showed cartoon-like drawings of the Manhattan skyline with skyscrapers that included the Twin Towers and the Statue of Liberty in the background. Matt then pointed to the Twin Towers and said, very matter-of-factly, "Bad men knocked these buildings over." Then in an agitated voice added, "Planes broke them. I couldn't help. People jumped because they wouldn't wait for me to get to them. I was stuck. I was on the floor with my breathing mask on and used my axe to break a hole in the wall so I could get the people out because they're calling for help. I couldn't help. I couldn't get the people out." After hearing what her son had just said, Michelle was totally dumbfounded. How the hell did her son know about the 9/11 tragedy? They'd never even spoke about it or even looked at any pictures. Michelle noticed a change in her son when he started to speak about the technical aspects of firefighting. He showed no emotion except his concerns about protecting his family, and on this particular occasion he was clearly upset. When word had spread about Matt's vivid recollection about not only being a firefighter but had been involved in the terrible 9/11 incident, Jeff Keane, a retired assistant fire chief from Connecticut, offered to give his opinion of the young boy's description and was amazed about Matt's technical knowledge of firefighting along with the boy's sense of humour, language, swagger and selflessness of a professional firefighter. Jeff also laughed when Matt said that he was not an actual firefighter but was in fire rescue. Jeff said that he must have been in a rescue unit, and that is exactly the way they spoke. Fire rescue are the elite of the FDNY. Apparently Matt had also talked about getting a new fire truck because their old one was wrecked and the new one had a TV on it and a boat on top. Jeff said he was perfectly correct about the truck and the TV screen was probably a computer terminal. Some trucks do have small boats because they also do water rescue, as Manhattan is an island surrounded by water. Matt was sure that his hat is black with a red stripe, and that he had a picture of a wolf with the moon on his truck, and he always refers to the truck as his, and he would ride in the front of the truck, but he's not a chief. Jeff Keane said that the FDNY helmets are black with reflective tape on them, so they can be seen at night. Keane now believed that Matt was probably a lieutenant or captain. Matt also described being a scuba diver and spoke about his gear. When he was given flippers and a mask as a present, he put them on and walked backwards into the pool saying, "See, this is how you do it." Matt was correct because anything a fireman wears on the job was called their gear. Many in the fire rescue are scuba divers, and going backwards into the water is how it was done. There appears no doubt that Matt had done it before. Matt had previously said that people were falling from a building because they wouldn't wait. He said he was on the floor with his breathing mask on and used his axe to break a hole in the wall so we could get the people out. His mother decided to correct him and said, "No, baby, they were not falling, they were jumping. It was not that they wouldn't wait, they couldn't wait." Michelle said that there was no way that her son could not have been a firefighter, seeing his knowledge and small details of the job, along with his feelings and deep concern to help people. He is a firefighter deep in his soul. However, even more evidence mounted when Matt recalled even more details of his former life and remembered running down the stairs in one of the towers screaming that they had orders to get out immediately, where Matt told another man to go ahead and he would catch up as soon as he got to the people who were calling for help. Obviously, Matt had never made it out alive, which is why this life he was so obsessed in his early play with trying to break down the walls in his house because he believed there was a fire behind them. Matt was reenacting his last moments because it had unfinished business, saving the people trapped behind the wall. In conclusion, how on earth could a young boy have such deep knowledge of firefighting at such a young age? Everything Matt has said or role-played leaves no doubt that he was a firefighter who had lost his life in one of the Twin Towers and had now reincarnated as a young boy called Matt in California, who continued to relive the life of a firefighter.